Welcome to the Women Talk podcast, where ordinary women share their extraordinary stories. We would love for you to share your story on our podcast. Go to www.womentalk.ca and apply to share your story. And now let's welcome your host, founder, and CEO of Women Talk, Bridget Lessard-Diel.
Welcome to the Women Talk podcast. I'm very excited today because my guest is an incredible modern woman. She is an entrepreneur, a published author, a coach, and a mother. 4 children, one with drug addiction problems, one is transgender, one is celiac, and on top of it all, Tammy suffered from postpartum disorder. Her story is full of amazing advice for us. Let's listen to Tammy's story, the blissful grief of motherhood.
The blissful grieving of being a mother. There's at least one truth I have learned about in this world and life in general, and that's life is full of contrasts. Light and dark, hot and cold, pain and pleasure, happiness and sorrow, and love and loss. Being a mother is about love and loss. Sarah. I stood in my kitchen about 6 months pregnant with my first child when I referred to myself in conversation as mommy for the first time. The realization that I was a new mom and that I was now mommy and not my mother hit me so hard that I had to brace myself on the counter. Warmth filled my chest, akin to having your elementary school crush hold your hand. I was truly in love with Sarah before I even met her. About a month after she was born, my then husband shared with me that I looked at the baby now the way I looked at him. I used to look at him. He knew that he could never compete with the depth of love that I felt for Sarah, and he was right. I would do anything and everything for the tiny bundle in my arms. As much as I loved Sarah, I lost myself. And I lost my romantic expectations of how life was supposed to turn out. No mother holds their newborn baby and wishes them a life filled with the struggles of mental illness and drug addiction. And yet, that's what we were dealt. I fought against that destiny with my every ounce, doing what I thought was right for her, only to fail miserably. I eventually learned that she needed to get help for herself and she needed to spearhead her own recovery. And she did so after I let go of my idea of how things were supposed to be. As much as I had lost myself during the worst years of her mental illness, I doubt I would have chosen to love Sarah any less in order to avoid any of the pain. Victoria. Have you ever sat in a crowded place and felt the eyes of someone on you? And then when you look up to meet their gaze, they look away quickly? That's my relationship with my second daughter, Vicky. I was diagnosed with postpartum depression after Vicky was born. The illness robbed me of the joy of a new baby, even though she was an easygoing, always smiling doll. Vicky spent most of her early childhood invisible, ever quiet, ever accommodating, and forever in the shadow of Sarah's larger-than-life presence. By the time I was done trying to save Sarah from herself and tried to make eye contact with Vicky, she looked away and moved on with her life. My grief with Victoria is for the loss of the opportunity to connect. As much as Vicky was invisible, she was also the drama queen. Attention was sought by over-the-top dramatics, and I swiftly ignored them. I didn't want to feed the monster of negative attention seeking. I did not realize at the time that ignoring the drama was killing the source of all connection to who Vicky was at her core. We are slowly making our way back to the closeness I have always longed for with her. We managed to talk about what inspires and moves her in spurts when the veil of distance and protection between us is allowed to briefly drop. Erin. I distinctly remember thinking that something bad would happen with my fourth pregnancy because my third child was too perfect. How crazy is that? I worried about what struggles would come their way. I hoped that Sarah's struggles were enough for one family and that the rest of the kids would be immune and my heart would get a reprieve. And Aaron was absolutely perfect. My third child was a blue-eyed, curly blonde-haired, quick to giggle, gentle, kind-hearted, easily amused, intelligent joy of a child. She had the perfect childhood until puberty hit like a hurricane and completely turned our world on its axis. Today, Aaron, E-R-I-N, is now Aaron, A-A-R-O-N. He continues to be funny, empathetic, smart, and deeply self-aware. He just happens to dress like a boy and use male pronouns now. Aaron is transgender. His initial social transition and my difficult journey to acceptance took about 9 months. But if I've learned anything from the loss of my idea of a perfect life with Sarah, I know there is more to the loss of my third daughter than wearing blue instead of pink. I had to grieve the future I had envisioned for my daughter. But once those tears dried, I got back to supporting Aaron. My new son has a world of judgment, surgeries, and a lifetime of hormone replacement therapy ahead of him, and he needs an understanding mom. I also happened to learn through his transition that I would have a gift of advocacy and a new tribe of phenomenal friends. Anderson. Following closely on Victoria's footsteps, Anderson is keeping a low profile in our family dynamics. He was born difficult to feed with an inability to latch on in breastfeeding, and then grew up a picky eater. He was diagnosed with celiac disease at 10 years old. We grieved together the loss of gluten in his diet and the difficulty of navigating cross-contamination in public, and had to accept a lifelong autoimmune disorder. But I've learned from the loss of my connection from unassuming Vicky and will not take my connection with unassuming Anderson for granted. Anderson is funny, quick-witted, unbelievably smart, and tremendously creative. He is also a walking, talking example of all of the lasts in my life. The last pregnancy, the last baby, the last to breastfeed, the last to potty train, the last to teach how to read, the last to cuddle with me in bed, the last to need me. Motherhood is all too often portrayed as this blissful event in a woman's life. And sometimes it is. A lot of times it is. But it also holds an equal measure of tears and pain and loss and sorrow. The joy it brings, the strong bonds of connection, and the deep, enduring, unconditional love are absolutely worth every loss and every tear that we shed.
You want more out of Women Talk? Sign up for our Women Talk membership today. Receive discounts at all of our live events, talk on more stages, receive free monthly webinars, or host a webinar yourself. Join this powerful sisterhood we call Women Talk. Visit womentalk.ca/membership to join at 70% off for a limited time only.
Wow. That is like a lot of motherhooding to create a new word. That is just so much.
It is. It is. And
how did you keep?
Is only 22.
How are you keeping? Because it's still ongoing. Like, how old is your youngest?
He's going to be 11 next month.
So 11. So this is still like, there's still more to come. Like, how do you keep your sanity with all of this going on?
Yeah. Well, I have to stay grounded, and writing is where I keep my sanity. I have to process my emotions through writing. So writing that essay was very healing for me. It was a way for me to forgive myself for all of the things that weren't perfect as well. So, yeah.
So if there's moms out there that are really struggling with motherhood, writing is a good way to help yourself?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's different ways for different peoples to cope with things. If they need to speak to a professional or just talk it out with a friend. But I have always been a writer my whole life. So writing things down is really how I process life. Yeah.
How do you keep your identity to all of this craziness going on?
I lost it. I completely lost my identity. Like when I was younger, I was introduced as Sarah's mom or Vicky's mom. Like I didn't have a name. I was mom. Mom was the shield that I wore out in the world. And it took a long time especially with going through the issues with Sarah, to find who I am underneath all of that. And it's work. It's a lot of personal development work where you unpack it all. But I have to say, the one book that helped the most for me to find myself again is A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. When I read that, I was able to find who I was underneath all of the roles that we play in life. Yeah.
That first child, the first baby that you lay eyes on, I mean, you love all of your kids the same. It's like the same amount, but that very first baby,
yeah,
it's overwhelming.
I think it's the first time you really have a connection to unconditional love. Like you think you unconditionally love your boyfriend in high school, but when you hold your child, that's the first introduction to it.
Yeah, like it is so powerful. So my wife and I wasn't able to give birth, and I was really worried about the connection, because I always thought like it's all about, having the child inside of you creates this incredible connection. But I can tell you that when that baby was born, wow, I was blown away. Yeah. Even though I did not carry inside of me. And it's really powerful.
Yeah. It's down to your soul. I truly believe it. Yeah. Yeah.
And so what's been the most difficult thing for you to deal with all these children and everything going on? Like, what's the hardest thing for you personally to deal with?
I have to say, like, the hardest thing for me most recently is allowing myself to grieve. I had to allow myself to grieve everything with Aaron. And until I allowed myself to fully grieve, and I had to do it privately because it's not something you dump on your 12-year-old shoulders. But until I was able to deal with that, then I was able to be an advocate and a support and, accepting. But that was the hardest part, was taking the time to pull out from, I call it having your stuff together face. You put on this armor and you're out in the world and you're pretending that you have it all together, but you have to have time to crumble and fall apart so that you can build yourself back up again.
Now, if you had some advice for any of us moms, when you have one or two kids that are, have more things to deal with, and then you have the perfect kids that's just so easy, like, what piece of advice would you give us?
Don't forget the perfect kids. Like, really be attentive and schedule time for each of your children, because that's what happened with Vicky. Is she got lost in not needing the extra help and didn't get any extra attention either. So yeah, it's a lot of work to be a mom, but be as attentive and aware of each of your children and what space they're in, and celebrate the good stuff with them. Celebrate the good stuff that the difficult kids are having to deal with, because they don't want to have to wear the label of the difficult kid, right? And celebrate the good stuff with all of them. Yeah.
So you've been divorced?
Yeah.
And you're remarried?
Yeah.
And how do you think having hard issues, like, how do you keep your marriage healthy when you deal with very difficult issues?
Therapy.
Thank God for therapy.
Yeah. My second husband and I are doing fabulously. And, you know, I don't know that you can compare one problem to another problem, but I think we are doing well because we chose to focus on our marriage. I think the lessons that I've learned with my the problems or the difficulties with my younger children is that not to lose myself and not to lose our marriage. So that were the lessons.
How do you do that?
You schedule, you pay attention, you do the work, you go to therapy, you go out on date nights, you sit down and you talk each other, you look at each other in the white of the eyes. I think the hardest thing that the world has set up for us right now is that everything's a distraction. You know, you could be playing word games on your cell phone, you could be on social media, you could be watching Netflix, you could be out, you know, with the boys, or there's so many ways for us to not connect with each other. Yeah. And it really is an effort to say, okay, we are actually going to spend 10 minutes and ask each other what we did in our day today.
And do it in a way that you're really present.
Exactly.
Because I know that's an issue I have. Like, I'm a multitasker, maybe from hell, some people would say. But to like really shut it all down and focus on one thing. I think that's something that's becoming very difficult for people.
It is. And I think it's what our kids want. I think it's what our spouses want. I think it's what we want, really. You know, I'm a multitasker too. I say multitasking lives in the ovaries.